A woman like you shouldn't be raising a child near contaminated swampland. That's what they told Marin Corley, a single mother with nothing left to lose and a daughter she refused to give up. When a billion-dollar corporation tries to erase her family's forgotten legacy one, buried deep beneath a rotting wooden house in Louisiana, Marin uncovers something more dangerous than secrets the truth. But the closer she gets, the more it costs her. And not everyone wants the past to rise from the mud. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The last batch of wilted greens refused to stand straight, no matter how tightly Marin bundled them. She wrapped the twine twice, pulled it hard, and set the bunch aside on the cracked wooden table. The late sun pressed low against the horizon, casting a coppery hue across the market stalls. Most vendors had already closed shop. Only the hum of an old radio and the flap of a canvas tarp overhead broke the stillness. Bayou Development to fund restoration of the eastern wetlands, the announcer said. Static filled the pause. Marin paused, hands still resting on a bruised tomato. Her jaw shifted ever so slightly as if biting back a thought. From her left, a woman with a sun hat too big for her frame ambled closer, plastic bag rustling. "You're that girl used to study at LSU Ag, right?" The woman said, not unkindly but not softly either. "Shame. Heard you gave it all up." "Poor thing." Marin offered a smile, tight, short-lived. Her fingers dug deeper into the edge of the table. She muttered something about the heat and dropped her gaze to her boots. Dirt-crusted, scuffed at the toe soles, slightly peeling. Behind her, Tess waited silently, arms folded, chin lowered. The little girl hadn't spoken since noon. She'd stood that way at the edge of the stall since they arrived, neither whining nor smiling, just watching people pass like shadows in a hallway. Marin packed the last of the unsold produce into a splintered crate. The car's liftgate creaked as she hauled it into place, careful not to crush the eggs. The radio continued behind her, now playing a country ballad full of ache and win. Tess climbed into the passenger seat without being told. She glanced at her mother but said nothing. Marin closed the trunk, wiped her palms on her jeans, and lingered a second, staring past the lot toward the tree line. Beyond that, fields, marsh, still water veined with reeds, and somewhere in that haze, a house that hadn't been mentioned in years. She hadn't opened the letter yet. She could still feel it in her jacket pocket, folded twice, edges soft with age. "Mom," Tess asked, voice light as paper, "why do people laugh when they talk about Grandma's house?" Marin's thumb skimmed the corner of her mouth. She gave no reply, eyes dropping again to her boots, mud-caked, swollen with the morning's dew. Nothing in nature truly shattered. Often it simply lay submerged for a time. She pulled the driver's door open. A mild gust swept in, carrying the mingled scents of hay exhaust and, far in the distance, a whiff of marsh decay. Across the street, an SUV idled in silence behind the hardware store. The engine was off. A man sat in the front seat, pen poised against paper. His stare did not waver, his expression sealed behind glass. Marin stayed still. He shifted first, lowering the pen, cocking his head, then returning to his notes. By the next morning when she stepped into Municipal Hall, the image hadn't left her the pen. The unblinking watch, the hush trapped behind the window. Benches lined the chamber's back wall, their varnish polished thin by years of waiting. Ceiling fans labored slowly above, yet the air pressed damp against skin. Marin settled into the last row's shoulders, tight coat collar, twisted high as if trying to fold herself smaller. At the front, Kylene stood with her hands joined loosely, tone measured and steady. Her beige blazer caught the overhead light as she angled toward the panel. "I've looked after Tess before," she said. "When her mother was absent, I stepped in willingly. But this can't go on. Tess deserves constancy, a real bed, meals that come when they should, a home, not a temporary fix." One of the councilwomen nodded, pen ticking lightly against her pad. Low murmurs rose from the middle rows, neighbors, some curious, some already siding. Kylene never once turned toward Marin. She didn't have to. "I don't doubt that Marin loves her daughter," she went on, "but affection alone doesn't keep lights on or water clean." That struck. Several people shifted. A cough broke the quiet. A whisper slipped between two bent heads. Marin kept her eyes lowered to the worn floorboards beneath the folding chairs, darker in patches as if water had lingered too long. Her boots felt weighted. She hadn't spoken all morning, and now her throat seemed unwilling to open. The judge, a thin man with clear-frame glasses and an unreadable mouth, scanned his notes. Ms. Corley, he said, tone even but without gentleness, can you confirm your current residence? She rose slowly, envelope ready in her grasp. It's changing, she answered. We're moving at week's end. His gaze lifted. To where, advancing to the front table, she set the envelope down. From it she drew 3 items, a deed copy, a tarnished brass key, and a folded note. A corner bore a greasy smudge like something long pressed against it. My grandmother passed 3 weeks ago, Marin explained. She left us the house in Lafayette. The title's in my name. A laugh cut loose from the back. Someone muttered, that place really. Marin's face didn't shift. An attorney for the city rose, smoothing her blazer. If I may, Your Honor, the property falls inside the Bayou Development Zone. It's flagged for condemnation, environmental risks. Marin blinked. That's news to me. The woman arched a brow. It's on record. Several reports cite contamination, unstable ground. Marin did not turn to gauge Kylene's reaction. Instead, her grip closed around the key thumb, tracing its deep scratches. The judge adjusted his frames. Is the house presently livable? A pause, then a nod. It needs repairs, but yes, it has a roof, walls, a well. The councilwoman on the left leaned her head slightly. Any income source tied to this move? Marin hesitated. Her other hand opened the note, delicate ink, each line bent in a familiar slope. Go there. Not because the house is still standing, but because something within it endures. She let it rest between her fingers, unspoken, the words alive in the silence. The judge looked at her for a long moment. Very well. We'll allow a provisional grace period, 30 days. If the environment proves safe and suitable, we'll revisit custody. If not, guardianship will be reassigned. Kylene gave a polite nod, then sat without a sound. Marin gathered the documents with a single nod. As she turned to leave, her gaze skimmed the gallery faces, shifting away in unison. No one shifted to make room. She edged past knees, handbags, and sharp heels without slowing. Outside, dusk had folded over the courthouse. The lot hummed with moths circling halogen lamps. She unlocked the truck. Tess was already asleep in the passenger seat, head against the glass, hands tucked beneath her chin. Marin slid behind the wheel, the engine sputtering awake. For a moment she stayed still. No music, no words. Her hand drifted across the console, brushing the old key left there. She lifted it, traced its grooves with her thumb, then closed her palm around it. The headlights carved through the evening as the truck rolled toward the county line. Hours later, the highway lay empty, pines blurring along its edges, an occasional pair of headlights slicing past. The sky split open west of Franklin, rain spitting on and off, soft, then steady, then soft again. Marin's knuckles gripped the wheel, eyes fixed on the white lines dissolving in the beams. Tess had drifted off once more, legs tucked like a cat, hood bunched beneath her chin. They stopped at a gas station, more for the restroom than the tank. The place looked untouched since the Clinton years. A flickering open sign pulsed faintly behind a smeared window. While Tess slipped into the bathroom, Marin stood at pump 3, card already swiped, nozzle humming as it filled the tank. From the office, a man stepped out, shirt buttoned to the collar, Devco stitched neat above the pocket. He didn't smile, just nodded one as slow. You headed east? Marin lifted her eyes. Not really. He gestured toward the truck. That your kid? She stayed quiet. Plenty of folks sniffing around the eastern track these days, he said. You from there used to be? She replied, tightening the gas cap. Not anymore. He studied her a moment longer, then shrugged as if dropping something trivial. Just thought you should know, he added, those areas, some of them aren't safe. Before she could respond, he turned back, boots squelching on wet pavement. The office door shut behind him without a sound. The road narrowed after that, softened. Trees pressed closer. Branches scraped the windshield. Somewhere out there a frog croaked low, and leaves stirred just beyond the beam of light. By the time they reached the house, the sun had vanished completely. Marin pulled on to what was once gravel, now mostly mud. The porch slouched like a tired animal, water licking beneath the lowest plank. Tess stood beside her, arms wrapped tight around her stomach. It smells like wet books, she whispered. Marin didn't argue. She pressed the door open. It groaned but yielded. A wave of mildew and rot surged out. The flashlight in her hand flickered before holding steady. They spread sleeping bags across what might have been a living room. The floor sagged toward the center, warped by years of water. Tess pointed upward at beams marked with odd carvings, looping cuts half hidden by cobwebs. Was that Grandma, she asked. No, that was Everett, her father Marin murmured, tracing one of the patterns. He was a scientist, worked with plants. She said he built this room himself. Tess drew the blanket tight to her chin. Are you sure you're not crazy? A dry sound escaped Marin's throat. Not entirely. That night Tess burned with fever. Marin soaked a rag in bottled water, pressing it to her daughter's forehead. She sat against the wall on the warped floor, listening to each uneven breath, her own thoughts too loud against the hush. She had forgotten how absolute night could be when no lamps glowed, no cars passed. Every groan of wood, every faint crackle in the walls made her shift. Her fingers rested on the flashlight's edge. She kept it dark. By morning, the fever had broken. Tess woke hungry and irritable, demanding toast they didn't have. Marin promised hot food later and began stripping sheets from furniture one by one. Dust rose in clouds, catching in gold slants through windows too grimy to clear. In a cabinet beneath the window, she uncovered a wooden box the size of a shoebox latch rusted shut. A faded emblem was etched across the lid, 3 leaves within a circle almost lost under grime. She pried it open with a butter knife from the drawer. Inside lay delicate glass vials, most empty. A notebook. A photograph of a man in suspenders, squinting as if forced into the frame. Down the hall, Tess shouted something about spiders. Marin slid the box under her arm and froze for a moment, heart tapping hard against her ribs. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Kylene's name lit up the screen. She hesitated before answering. They're coming next week, Kylene said flatly. The county. Environmental review, home inspection. They're sending a team. Marin's throat dried. Already it's standard. If they don't pass you, Tess goes into temporary custody. Static cracked between them. Then I'm just letting you know. You need to be ready. The call ended. A branch snapped somewhere beyond the porch. The house settled again, deep and long, like it had been holding its breath. She barely slept, lying awake until the dark thinned and the first gray light pushed through the curtains. By morning, dust lifted in lazy spirals as Marin pulled the last of the old rugs from the hallway floor. Tess, kneeling a few feet away, was busy poking at something with the handle of a broken broom. The floorboard near her was darker than the others, slightly warped, the edges splintered. There's something under here, Tess mumbled, squinting. Marin knelt beside her, palm gliding over the wood. Scratches scored the grain deep and narrow, as though clawed into place. She pressed lightly and the board rocked. With a flathead screwdriver pulled from the kitchen drawer, she pried at one edge until the plank gave with a dry creak. Beneath it stretched a cavity lined in metal, flashing stuffed with burlap sacks gone brittle. Tess leaned closer. It's like a time capsule. Buried among the fabric rested a rusted tin box, rectangular and bound by 2 stiff latches. Marin eased them open. A sharp scent rose, metallic, stale, like wet coins left too long in a jar. The box held maps, brittle pages, plastic pouches labeled in faded ink. Latin names trailed across column notes in tight handwriting. Folded in one corner lay a black ink diagram creased and marked Wells 3B, a red circle drawn around a pond shape. Some plants listed were strangers to her. Others she hadn't heard since undergrad, species marked extinct or doubtful. This wasn't mere fieldwork. It was a record and archive. Her gaze returned to the crawl space. Why had Everett hidden it? Tess reached for a yellowed sheet, eyes wide. Did people know about this? Marin shook her head, uncertain. The day thinned into gray. As the sun sank behind the tree-lined hallway, bulbs flickered once, then went dark. She tapped the switch again. Nothing. Power's gone, she said. Grab the flashlight. Tess already held it ready. They moved with care. Floorboards sighed under Marin's weight. Rain began again, light tapping at the panes like nails. From the back porch, the swamp spread into a dense hush trees, bending slowly in the distance. The beam swept across wet leaves in the outline of the dock. Mom, Tess whispered, "There's someone out there." Marin followed her eyes. At the clearing's edge, near the trees, a figure stood motionless, tall, narrow, too still for any animal. She lifted the light, but the shape slipped into the reeds. No rustle, no splash. Her stomach tightened. Let's get back. They bolted the door, pulled the curtains, and stayed in the kitchen. The flashlight lay across the table, casting long shadows against the walls. Later, with Tess asleep under a quilt in the corner, Marin returned to the tin box. Her hands trembled as she sifted through pages. One sheet was torn down the middle. Another stained with dark ink blotched deep into the fibers. At the back of a notebook, she uncovered a smaller slip scrawled in hurried pen. The paper was damp at the corner, the words slanted sharply to the right. If Bayou gets the third layer samples, it happens again. Newbridge all over. Newbridge. Her breath caught. She remembered the name vaguely, an old news headline years ago. Something about contamination lawsuits, sealed settlements. Marin stood and crossed to the window. The trees were still again. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass-drawn, pale shoulders, hunched forward like someone carrying too many bags. She grabbed her phone from the countertop. The battery blinked red. One bar of signal. She dialed Kylene. Voicemail. She tried again. Still nothing. Tess stirred on the floor. Are we going back? Marin turned phone clutched in her hand. I think we should, she said. Maybe just until we figure out no. Tess sat up, eyes clearer than they'd been in days. Not yet. We don't even know what this place is. A gust of wind hit the window. The curtains shifted slightly. Marin sat down beside her daughter flashlight, resting between them, its beam softening into the dark. She picked up one of the maps again, ran her thumb over the red mark labeled 3B. Out back, something knocked once against the side of the house. Marin held her breath, listening for footsteps, splashes, anything. But the dark pressed back, offering nothing. She stayed awake long after Tess had drifted off the weight of the maps, and the knock settling heavier with every hour. By the time the sun burned through the curtains, she knew what she had to do. The receptionist barely looked up when Marin walked in. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile sheen across the white tile floor. Everything in the Bayou Devco office felt pressed tight, shirts tight, smiles, tight-lipped greetings. She stepped up to the counter, adjusting the collar of her jacket. I'm here about the property out by Parish Road 17, she said. The land near the eastern wetlands. The receptionist tapped a few keys, slow and distracted. You the owner? Marin hesitated just a second. Potentially. I'm considering selling. That got the woman's attention. A small nod, then a clipped response. You'll want Suite B, down the hall, first door left. The door was already ajar. A man with a red tie sat behind the desk, sleeves rolled. He didn't rise when she entered. He pointed at the chair across from him and spoke while flipping through a folder. Selling, huh? Not many people hold on to land in that area for long. I just inherited it, Marin replied, trying to understand what it's worth. He chuckled without looking up. That depends. What do you know about it? Not much, she lied. His eyes flicked up just for a moment. Then he leaned back and folded his arms. Your grandmother lived out there, didn't she? Marin didn't respond. He tapped the folder in front of him. People like her always thought they could keep secrets buried in the mud. But that place, let's just say it comes with baggage. She blinked. What kind of baggage? He shrugged. Swamp water. Old rumors. Maybe a few violations we haven't enforced yet. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. You sure she didn't leave you any kind of warning? Her fingers curled around the strap of her purse. Thanks for your time. As she walked out, he called after her without turning. If you change your mind, we buy quick. No questions asked. That night, the town hall overflowed. Folding chairs scraped against the tile floor as residents filed in, murmuring about drainage taxes and Devco's new plan to rehabilitate the wetlands. A projector screen flickered to life at the front of the room. A clean-cut woman in a Devco blazer presented charts, images of murky water, microscopic slides of bacteria. These areas are not only unstable, she said, pointer tapping against the map, but they may pose long-term biological risks. Exposure to water sources like wells 3B could carry pathogens linked to respiratory illness. Marin felt her chest tighten. In the third row, Kylene stood, her voice projecting across the crowded room. We have children living out there. They bathe, cook, sleep near that water. I don't think it's safe. Some nodded. A man clapped once before stopping himself. Marin rose slowly, walked to the front, and waited for the mic. When it passed to her, she cleared her throat. My family's lived on that land for 3 generations. My great-grandfather was a researcher. He studied the water, the plants. He documented species no one else had access to. The Devco rep tilted her head. With respect, Miss Corley, that documentation has never been made public. It's anecdotal, Marin's voice sharpened, because it was buried. On purpose. From the back, someone scoffed. She scanned the faces, but they'd already turned away. A voice near her shoulder leaned in low and gravelly. "I remember Everett," said an old man in a priest collar. His breath smelled faintly of tobacco and cloves. "They didn't just ignore him. They erased him." She turned, but he'd already sat back down. A man near the exit stepped forward, slick, suit black hair combed straight back. He didn't take the mic. He didn't need to. "I'm Randall Clegg," he said. "I manage DevCo's field operations for this region. And I must say," he smiled without warmth, "it's a shame. A legacy of questionable science now threatening public health. It's almost poetic." Marin fixed her gaze on him. "You're twisting it." "Am I?" he countered. "Or are you clinging to folklore because you're out of options?" The room stayed silent. No one came to her defense. She handed back the mic and walked toward the exit, willing her hands not to shake. The night air felt damp, unnervingly still. A streetlight buzzed above the truck. Something was wrong. The front tire sagged, rubber split open like a torn mouth. She crouched, brushing her fingers along the gash. Someone had cut it clean through. Rising slowly, she scanned the vacant lot. No one lingered. In the end, she called a tow and waited wordless while Tess slept curled against the passenger door. The ride back stretched long darkness pressing against the windows. By dawn, the house felt no safer than the lot had. The letter had come folded tight, slipped beneath the front door, with no knock, no call. Marin read it once at the kitchen sink, then again while Tess sat on the floor behind her spooning cereal that had turned soggy hours earlier. Temporary suspension due to classroom disruption. It wasn't the first time a child in Lafayette got punished for speaking up, but this one rang hollow in Marin's chest, clanging like a rusted bell. That afternoon, they drove past the edge of town where pavement crumbled into gravel and forgotten parking lots. She pulled beside an abandoned cafe, its windows boarded halfway sign, missing letters, only a faint ghost of Briar's Brew remained. Weeds strangled the porch steps. Once it had been her parents' favorite spot. She'd sat by the left window at 8 years old, sipping cherry cola, while her father sketched stars on napkins. Tess nudged a crushed bottle near the curb. "This where Grandma used to dance," Nomarin said. "She used to argue with your grandpa here." Loudly, a faint smile touched Tess as she slid back into the passenger seat. Her backpack dropped to the floor, still zipped from the morning. "Mrs. Cully said people from the swamp don't know what success smells like. What did you say?" I told her she smelled like powdered donuts and taxpayer money. Marin didn't laugh. Not this time. She simply watched her daughter, a tightness pulling inside her. Not pride, not yet. Just a flicker of recognition this girl had steel, and it hadn't come from nowhere. From the glove box, Marin pulled a worn folder, spreading it across the dashboard. Among the loose sheets, one photograph slipped free. She hadn't looked at it in years. Two men stood on a dock, work shirts stained with swamp water. On the left, Everett, her great-grandfather, smiled as though holding a secret. She flipped it over. The faded handwriting read, "Third layer sample. 002 ml triggers response. Lock file if breach suspected." Her stomach tightened. She rifled through the folder again, faster this time. Near the bottom, between mold-streaked pages, lay a lab note she had almost discarded. Now the words carried weight. Research terminated not due to scientific failure, but due to refusal to submit proprietary materials for testing. The sheet slipped into her lap. Everett hadn't been silenced for being wrong. He'd been silenced because he refused to let them be right. A gust whipped grit across the windshield. Tess leaned forward, watching vines sway along the cafe awning. "You think someone forced him to stop? I don't know yet." Her daughter turned, searching her face. "Then we shouldn't leave. Not now." Marin's phone buzzed. A message from Colleen: meeting rescheduled. More reps from Bayou will be attending. Town council wants a full review. And beneath it, a warning she hadn't asked for. They're calling it a biological risk zone now. If Tess stays there, be ready to explain that in court. The screen dimmed. Marin stared through the windshield for a long moment. Then she reached back into the glove box and pulled out the business card she'd stashed months ago after the funeral. Dr. Inez Holloway, environmental biology, retired former research fellow, DeBito Project. The name had surfaced again and again in old journals, scribbled margins, half-sentences from her grandmother's taped interviews. Holloway had been Everett's last collaborator before the university shut it all down. Marin hadn't thought to call until now. She dialed. 2 rings, then a click. Inez Holloway. This is Marin Corley, Everett's granddaughter. I found something. A lot of things, actually. I think he was. She stopped, breath caught. Can I meet you? Silence then, the sound of paper being shuffled. Where are you, Lafayette? Near the Wells. Come to the old library on Carson Street. Tomorrow. 10 sharp. Bring what you have. The line went dead. Tess sat up straighter. She believed Grandma, didn't she? Marin tucked the photo back into the folder. She did more than believe. She stayed after everyone else left. A train groaned somewhere across the bayou, its echo carrying through the still night. The cafe door rattled, though the wind had died. Marianne's hand hovered over the keys before she glanced once more at the fading letters of the sign. The memory lingered as she drove the back roads toward the house, a map spread across Tess's lap in the dim glow. The trees behind the property loomed like a second wall taller than she remembered, moss draped in gray veils. Marin pushed aside a low branch, damp bark scraping her wrist, and waited for Tess. The girl trudged through underbrush, boots dragging, eyes fixed on the map, fluttering like something alive. There, Tess pointed toward a crooked stump half sunken in mud. That should be the old marker. Marin narrowed her eyes past the roots. A rise in the ground caught the beam just enough to reveal a metal ring set into wood half hidden by brambles. It hadn't appeared on any chart they'd studied, only on the sketch Everett had tucked in a folder marked Field Station 3B. She brushed away debris and pulled. The hatch gave with a groan as though sealed for decades. Beneath yawned narrow stairs vanishing into shadow. Tess hovered close. What if it's full of snakes? Marin smirked, coughing, when dust filled her nose. Then let's not upset them. They descended cautiously. Wooden steps flexed but held. Below, a rectangular bunker spread out, low ceiling pressing down. Concrete walls were lined with shelves burdened by rusted cans, cracked jars, and glass slides thin enough to vanish in the flashlight's glow. A broken chair lay sideways near a steel cabinet. On the wall hung a warped clipboard. Marin flipped through its logbook, Everett's tight script crowding the pages. One line circled twice in pencil stopped her, Wells 3B yielding consistent results. Delay handover. Evidence not stable. At the far end, Tess crouched beside a crate. Mom, you need to see this. Inside lay a row of vials, most empty, one still holding a viscous green fluid. Wrapped in wax paper beside them rested a faded photograph. Marin unfolded it carefully. Everett stood with a woman in a white lab coat, his hand resting on a metal pump tangled in odd vines. Behind them, the trees burned red, the color so vivid it looked unnatural. She held the picture against her chest. We take what we can carry, leave the rest. Back at the truck, they swaddled the sample in old t-shirts, packed it in the cooler, and turned north. The biology wing at LSU smelled sharply of formaldehyde and floor polish. Dr. Inez Holloway, lean and silver-haired, greeted them in a cluttered office, alive with plants and cracked pots. Ink and chlorophyll stained her fingers. She lifted the vial toward the window, as though the light itself might reveal its secrets. Where did you get this? She asked. A research station. Unmarked. I think it was Everett's last. Inez unscrewed the cap, sniffed, then nodded slowly. This isn't swamp water. What is it? Bacteria. Plant-based. Possibly a strain of something symbiotic. And very, very old. She slid the vial into a sealed tray and began scribbling notes. This could inhibit protein breakdown. In theory, delay cell decay. Marin's heart jumped. As in, not a cure, Inez warned, but if it's what I think it is, it could extend the life of degenerating cells. Cancer. Muscular dystrophy. Maybe more. Tess leaned over the table, fascinated. Did he know? Inez didn't answer. Instead, she pulled an envelope from her drawer, Everett's name, handwritten across the front. He sent me this 23 years ago. Told me to destroy it if I ever felt scared. Did you? No. But I also never opened it. Her voice dropped. Bayou shut down his project, Marin. Not because it failed, because he refused to sell. Marin stared at the envelope. You think that's what this is about? Still, whatever he found terrified them, and it should terrify you. On the way back to the truck, Marin watched Tess sketching leaves in her notebook. "What are you drawing? The tree in the photo." "The red one?" Tess didn't look up. "If Grandpa got shut down for this, will they try to shut you down too?" Marin hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe." Tess kept drawing. "Then we better get better at hiding." They drove in silence until the phone buzzed. Inez's name lit up. Marin answered on speaker. A voice crackled. "Not Inez's. Male. Hollow. You've poked the wrong nest, Miss Corley. Wells 3B is buried for a reason." The line went dead. Marin didn't speak, but her hand tightened on the wheel. Tess looked at her eyes wide, then turned back to her sketch pad, pressing harder with the pencil until the lines tore the paper. Neither of them said another word the rest of the drive. By the time they reached the house, night had thickened and sleep came shallow, restless. When morning finally arrived, the world had not softened. The envelope came without a return address, just her name misspelled slightly, and a warning heat that pulsed through the paper before she even opened it. Marin tore it open at the kitchen counter, hands still damp from rinsing out Tess's lunchbox. Notice of unauthorized access to restricted wetlands. Ongoing activity may constitute federal trespass and environmental tampering. Legal action is pending. She dropped the letter like it had stung her. On the windowsill, Tess's boots sat drying in the sun. The girl had spent the morning collecting leaves for a science project she hadn't dared present. Marin stared at them, unmoving, until her phone buzzed. A message from Kylene. No words, just a photo. Tess at school, sitting alone on a concrete bench, surrounded by scribbled chalk words. Sick water. Infected girl. A boy stood a few feet away, pointing and laughing. Underneath the image, Kylene had written, "You're hurting her. Please stop." Marin froze. Something within her seemed to crack loose. She paced once, twice, then snatched the folder from the counter, the one with Everett's maps and Inez's notes, and flung it across the room. Pages scattered like startled wings, some sliding under the fridge, others curling along the baseboards. Tess appeared in the doorway. "I was trying to finish homework," she said flatly. Marin didn't reply. She crossed the room, closed the bedroom door behind her, and leaned against it with both hands. Silence thickened. Down the hall came the creak of the screen door opening. When she emerged again, the house was quiet. No boots on the mat, no hum from the fan. She stepped out onto the porch. The sun had already dropped low, gilding the reeds. Marin called once. No answer. Panic surged like bile. Barefoot, she tore through the yard and into the marsh path branches, snagging her sleeves. Tess, a splash. Her chest dropped. Then footsteps, wet slow. Tess emerged from the trees, soaked to the knees, curls pasted to her forehead. Her face showed no panic, only a stillness that felt knowing. She walked straight to her mother and pressed something into her palm. A necklace wooden pendant carved with the same layered rings from Everett's 3B diagram. "I found it near the cypress pool, hanging from a root," she whispered. "I think someone meant for us to." Marin's throat closed. The edges were worn smooth-stained, dark with age, yet the symbol was clear, concentric arcs folding over themselves. "Why would someone leave this?" Tess shrugged. "Maybe so we'd remember what we're standing on." They walked back slowly. Marin lit lamps by hand. No words passed as dinner came together: boiled rice, leftover greens, a cracked egg stirred in. Tess ate without complaint, never asking why her mother's hand shook. Later that night, Marin sat on the porch, a blanket drawn around her shoulders, staring toward the water. Her phone lay face down. She didn't need to check it. She already knew the last message waiting there, a terse email from the attorney she'd counted on. Conflict of interest. Unable to represent further. Best of luck. She wanted to scream, to rip up the boards beneath her feet, to burn the files and let the whole mess sink into the swamp. She hadn't protected her daughter. She hadn't protected the work. Each step she took, someone was already ahead, rewriting the rules, shifting the lines. A moth battered the porch light, dazed but relentless. Below it, shadows moved at the tree line, too quick to follow, too soft to trust. She curled tighter into herself, pendant clutched in her fist. Behind her, the floor creaked. Tess's voice came through the screen. "You don't have to fix it all tonight. I know, but you're trying anyway." Marin turned, seeing the girl framed in the doorway, wrapped in her own blanket. She looked smaller than usual, Or maybe it was just the house pressing heavier around them. Tess stepped out, sat beside her, and rested her head on Marin's shoulder. The breeze carried the faint scent of earth and metal. Marin said nothing. She held the pendant between them and listened for some sign, anything that might still be worth fighting for. Deeper in the reeds, a ripple stirred. She barely slept, rising with first light already bracing for the next demand. By noon, the truck sat crooked at the yellow curb, hazard lights ticking like a countdown. Through the windshield, the school's brick walls glared under the sun. Tess sat alone on a bench behind the office window, backpack limp at her feet. The receptionist hardly looked up. "You'll need to sign here. There's a meeting request." In the small conference room, two staff members waited, one adjusting her glasses, the other folding his hands over a thin manila folder. "We're recommending Tess for transitional placement," the woman said. "In the city, a program better equipped to handle emotional irregularities." Marin blinked. "She's not irregular. She's been isolated, argumentative, distracted by external instability." The man nodded. "She's gifted, but the current environment isn't supporting that." Marin stared at the folder on the table. "She's not going anywhere. We're not removing her. Yet. This is a recommendation." They smiled like they'd practiced it. She signed nothing, gathered Tess without another word, and drove straight to the local community hall. The banner outside read Public Forum, Clean Water, Safer Swamps, sponsored by Bayou Devco. Plastic chairs lined up beneath flickering fluorescence. Locals mingled, sipping weak coffee, unaware or unwilling to notice the weight Marin carried through the door. On the far side of the room, a flat screen stood propped up beside a young man in a tailored suit. Randall wasn't present, but his echo lingered in the posture of every Devco rep in the room. The screen lit up. A video played grainy footage of Marin pacing her porch, voice crackling from a poor phone recording. "They'll take everything if we don't fight," the screen echoed, distorted. Tess's voice cut in, edited out of context. "Is this where people disappear like ghosts?" Murmurs spread. Marin's hands turned to fists. "That's been edited. You cut pieces together." The Devco rep stepped forward. "This is the kind of instability we're concerned about. Emotional volatility, paranoia. That's what festers when misinformation spreads unchecked." She turned toward the crowd, tried to find one familiar face willing to speak, but none met her eyes. Someone touched her sleeve. An old man in a corduroy coat handed a wrinkled paper to Tess with fingers that trembled slightly. "Your great-grandfather never trusted banks or labs," he muttered. "He hid the truth in something people laughed at. Said that's how secrets survive." Marin leaned over Tess's shoulder. The page was torn from a notebook. Handwriting shaky, water-stained. "If you're reading this, I couldn't say it aloud. They watched everything. But I recorded it all somewhere they'd never listen, where people pray, but don't believe. Everett." Her pulse stuttered. She turned the note over, blank on the back. But the writing pressed deep, the ink bled through like a map. In the top corner, barely visible, a scribbled sketch of a bell tower. Before she could ask the man anything else, he'd vanished into the shifting bodies. They left the forum before the closing statements. Back at the house, Tess unpacked her sketchbook, flipping to a new page. "Can we go to the place in that drawing?" Marin didn't answer. She pulled out her phone, eyes scanning a message that had arrived minutes earlier. From Dr. Inez Holloway, subject, results. Urgent. Marin initial testing shows presence of a rare enzyme potentially inhibitory to protein decay, especially in carcinoma strains. It's real. It's worth more than we imagined. But my lab was breached last night. Notes are missing. Computer files corrupted. Someone's watching. Be careful." Now, she read the message twice before erasing it. At the table, Tess shaded the edges of her drawing, red then gray, then green again. Rain drifted in slow sheets across the bayou, muffling the world beyond. Marin lingered by the window, eyes following the droplets sliding down the glass. Behind her came a faint shift, a creak from the hallway. She kept still, refusing to turn. The paper remained on the counter, curling at the corners, its ink still legible. Sleep came late, shallow, broken by each sound of the old house shifting in the rain. When morning arrived, she carried the unease with her into the chores that waited. The pendulum clock ticked with a stubborn rhythm, its wooden body dulled by age and a film of dust. Marin stared at it from across the room, a dish rag still damp in her hand. Her grandmother used to scold her for even breathing near that clock. It remembers she'd said once, tapping the casing with her knuckle, "And it keeps secrets better than people do." Marin set the rag down. She opened the glass face and gently reached behind the mechanism where the old gears clicked on like muscle memory. Her fingers scraped something tucked behind the paneling, dry and crumbling. A small key tarnished and cold. It bore a carved initial E. Tess peeked in from the hallway, her sketchbook under one arm. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere no one thought to look," Marin murmured, slipping the key into her coat. They drove toward the crumbling chapel, barely visible behind overgrown trees, its steeple leaning as if exhausted. This was where Everett used to teach long after the university revoked his tenure, long after the funding dried up. Students still came drawn more by what he didn't publish than what he did. Behind the church, a dead pine tree split open from its trunk. Moss lined the hollow like velvet. Marin knelt beside it, slid the key into a slot beneath the bark, and twisted. Something clicked. A small iron box emerged from a slit in the base so well hidden it seemed part of the roots. The lid resisted for a moment before cracking open, revealing a cassette tape, yellowed papers with faded ink, and a worn leather envelope sealed in wax. Tess leaned in. "That's his voice, right?" Marin didn't answer. She slipped the cassette into her old Walkman, still kept in a junk drawer for no good reason. Static crackled, then Everett's voice, deliberate, strained. "They offered $35,000 to stay silent. When I refused, they buried the findings. Bayou Devco used the Department of Natural Resources to classify Wells 3B as unstable siting, dangerous flora. The truth that water slows cell decay, it heals. And they knew." Her grip tightened on the Walkman. The last line trembled through the static. "If this gets out, make sure they can't erase it again." Back at the house, she scanned the documents under the kitchen light. One form, an official research license, was stamped with a seal that hadn't been used since 1987. Another showed the full map of the water table with Wells 3B circled in red and labeled primary sample, not for transfer. Her phone buzzed on the counter. "Inez." The voicemail was blunt. "It's solid, Marin, but without chain of custody, it won't hold up. We need something, anything that ties it to Everett's lab. Otherwise, they'll say you forged it." Marin sat silent, watching Tess sprawled on the floor, drawing spirals of the red tree canopy they had walked beneath earlier. She could release the tape, send it to Reporters League. It'd make it too loud to bury. Or she could stay quiet, let the house slip away. Let Devco win this round. Tess would be safe back in school, far from swamp-stained history. Tess looked up. "If I were sick, do you think that water would help me?" Marin exhaled hard through her nose, eyes burning. "You're not sick, baby. But what if someone else's?" No answer came. She turned the cassette in her hand, tape stretched tight like a slingshot, begging for release. A text arrived from Kylene. "You'll receive the custody filing tomorrow. I told you this would happen." Marin rose, tossed the phone onto the couch. Rain burst heavy and sudden, hammering the roof as if to shake the truth loose. She opened the kitchen drawer and pulled the old envelope. Inside was a single photo of Everett with two men in lab coats, a chalkboard behind them scrawled with the words, "If we don't preserve what heals us, who are we really protecting?" Snatching her car keys, she left the Walkman running and drove through drenched streets, headlights carving narrow paths, every stoplight feeling like a threat. By the time the courthouse loomed ahead, her pulse had steadied into something fierce. The building reeked of bleach and worn carpet. Marin paced the side corridor, cassette pressed deep in her coat pocket, the tape a living thing against her ribs. Her fingers shook, not with fear, but with anticipation sharpened by dread. Kylene appeared without warning, eyes unblinking. "If you do this," she said low, "you'll lose Tess." Marin glanced her way. "I already almost did. They're ready to paint you unstable. I saw the list of questions. It's a trap. They'll twist everything." Turning from her, Marin watched the fluorescent lights flicker overhead like faltering resolve. Maybe it's time they face what they've avoided. In the hearing room, rows of chairs filled fast, press officials, residents, strangers. Her boots scuffed across the wooden floor as she reached the front table. A glass of water waited untouched. Judge Halberd gave a nod for her to begin. Before she could speak, Randall Clegg stood with a polished smile. "We'd like to start with the mental health history of Dr. Everett Lang," he said smoothly. This affidavit, he held up a photocopy, details a psychiatric evaluation from 1991 citing paranoia and schizotypal traits. It undermines the credibility of his findings. Murmurs rippled through the room. Clegg pressed on. "The witness will testify that Dr. Lang claimed to hear voices in the trees and refused medication. This calls Miss Corley's claims into question." Marin opened her mouth, but nothing came. Her nails bit into the tabletop. A tall, clean-cut man took the stand, posing as a former student. He said Everett believed the swamp could speak, then laughed as though it were harmless folklore. The audience's laughter burned. Moraine's chest locked. The tape in her pocket felt icy now. She rose, lips parting, when footsteps echoed from behind. Small, steady. Tess. The girl stepped forward, ponytail askew, clutching a sheet of paper. "I have something," she said, voice clear. Judge Halbert frowned. "Young lady." "She has authority," Marin cut in, voice breaking through at last. "She's his blood. Let her speak." Tess handed the paper to the clerk, a signed letter yellowed and scanned from LSU's biology department. At the bottom, Everett's signature and a university seal affirmed his research suspended not for misconduct, but administrative conflict. The room hushed. Even Clegg's smirk faltered. Marin found her voice. "The tape I carry contains direct accusations of corporate manipulation and a government cover-up. Everett Lang wasn't delusional. He was silenced. And if you dare to listen, you'll hear the truth." Judge Halbert adjusted his glasses. "We will review all material submitted." Clegg leaned toward his aide, thumb flicking across a phone screen without pause. Beyond the courthouse doors, a Channel 9 reporter was already setting up makeup, heavy under the sun, smile sharp as glass. She angled her mic toward the exit. "Local mother creates chaos at environmental hearing, details at 6. The push alert hit Marin's phone before she even reached the back hallway. "Breaking: swamp woman disrupts council, claims plants cure cancer." She froze mid-step, the screen still glowing in her hand. The hallway seemed to close in narrower than before. Just a few feet ahead waited the door to the world beyond, yet her legs held fast, rooted where she stood. Mom, Tess whispered, tugging her coat. "They're lying. We know they are." Behind them, officials shuffled paper, whispered, regrouped. She crouched, brushed Tess's hair back. Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of carrying silence too long. "They're not afraid of me, honey. They're afraid of what I know." Tess didn't blink. "Then make them hear it." Marin exhaled, slid the cassette into her inner coat pocket. The cold metal steadied her spine. Clegg passed by on the way out, brushing too close, murmuring just for her, "That little stunt cost you more than you realize." She didn't turn to look. At the end of the hallway, a second news van pulled up. A man in a windbreaker lifted a boom mic. She kept walking, past the cameras, past the noise. Not towards safety, but toward the next place that would try to shut her down. The drive there was silent, headlights bouncing across damp asphalt until Kylene Street came into view. Kylene's porch light flickered as Marin stepped onto the warped planks. The air smelled like overripe gardenias and something burnt, maybe nerves. Kylene opened the door before she could knock, her face tight, her blouse half-buttoned like she'd dressed in a rush. "In here," she murmured, glancing over her shoulder as if someone might be watching. The house, unusually silent, made every step echo louder than it should. Marin followed her into the kitchen. A single lamp over the sink cast gold onto the peeling linoleum. Papers were scattered across the counter, maps, emails, red-marked documents with the Devco logo stamped in the corners. "You said it couldn't wait," Marin said, voice raw. Kylene poured coffee that neither of them would drink. "I should have told you sooner. About my internship. Devco, 2013. I was just out of undergrad, desperate for a way in." Marin stared. "You worked for them?" Kylene didn't flinch. "I archived digital files. They never let interns near research except once. A folder came through marked Wells 3B. I wasn't supposed to open it. But you did." Kylene nodded slowly. "Curiosity. I saw the early test data notes from Everett Lang. Nothing made sense until I saw your name." Marin blinked. "My name, not directly, but a memo flagged descendant non-cooperative liability potential. They meant your grandmother. And you." Marin backed against the counter. So you knew what they were doing, and you said nothing. I was 22. I thought I was protecting you by staying quiet. I deleted the archive path. Nobody noticed. But now they're digging it all up again. Marin gritted her teeth. They're coming after Tess. They've already drafted the emergency injunction. They'll file tomorrow morning. That video from your college protest, they plan to twist it. Call you a chronic agitator. A threat. Her knees wobbled. She grabbed the edge of the sink, breathing through the sting behind her eyes. I don't have anything left, Kai. I'm done. Let them take it. Kylene stepped forward gentler now. I've made mistakes, but I'm not letting them finish you. A soft ding from her laptop. Kylene spun it around. I just sent the full Wells 3B research files to Zeta McLean. She's the health reporter at Channel 5. She owes me. You still had the files, not all, just the raw test logs. But enough. It proves Devco falsified toxicity results in their report to the EPA. Marin couldn't speak. Her mouth opened then shut. Every word she'd prepared was dust. They're going to bury me for this, Kylene whispered. I'll lose my job. Maybe more. Marin stepped closer, touched her friend's wrist. Then we make it worth the cost. The phone rang. Kylene didn't move. Marin picked up the call. The voice was crisp-clipped. Ms. Corley. This is Tanya Abrams from Channel 5. We received materials regarding Bayou Devco and the suppression of environmental data. Can you meet for an on-camera interview tonight? Kylene gave a small nod. I'll be there, Marin said, hanging up. They drove wordless, Kylene gripping the wheel like she might splinter under the strain. Marin watched the passing streets, grocery stores, churches, the same corners of Lafayette she once strolled with a baby carriage and a broken sandal strap. At the station, a van idled out front, two techs working under floodlights. A producer greeted them with clipboard in hand and a nervous smile. In the prep room, Marin paced while Kylene sat hunched on the couch, elbows braced to her knees. You're going to change something tonight. Marin shook her head. I don't want to change the world. I just want my daughter safe. The crew beckoned. She walked into the studio, bare fingers curled around a printed copy of Everett's diagram. Her reflection in the soundproof glass startled her hair-unbrushed jacket, creased eyes steady. A mic clipped to her collar. The anchor counted down from 5. The red light blinked alive. Marin faced the lens. Years ago, my great-grandfather discovered something remarkable buried beneath this state. Something Devco never wanted the public to see, and they tried to silence everyone who came near it. Her words held firm. Until now. The lights dimmed as the segment closed the anchor, shifting to wrap up remarks. Marin let out a breath, the weight of it still pressing in her chest, then stepped away through a side door. When she returned to the prep area, the broadcast was already rolling. A television in the corner flickered, casting pale blue over the cramped room. Cameramen moved quickly beyond the glass wall, adjusting wires signaling to producers. Damp from the morning mist, Marin froze, eyes locked on the screen. A previously unreleased recording from 1982, believed to be the voice of Dr. Everett Lang, suggests decades of suppressed biomedical research, the anchor reported. The audio, verified by Louisiana State University's Historical Archives, points to direct corporate interference with federal environmental assessments. A low murmur spread. One staffer leaned to raise the volume. On screen, the clip began. Everett's rasp, aged but deliberate, carried through. If this reaches anyone, know this isn't a theory. Bayou knew. The enzyme isn't unstable. It threatens their control, not public safety. A gasp cut the air behind her. Marin held still. The report continued. Bayou Devco denies all allegations, calling the tape a forgery. However, LSU officials confirmed the cassette's authenticity cataloged under Wells Research Protocol 3B. Her grip closed on the satchel strap. Knees wavered but held. An intern hurried in, breathless. Phone call for you. Line 1. Marin stepped into the hallway, heart hammering. The receiver felt oddly warm against her ear. Ms. Corley, a woman spoke. This is Gina Maddox with Greenbridge Labs. She blinked at the vending machine across the hall. We watched the broadcast, Gina continued. We've followed rumors of Wells 3B for years. No one's ever had something verifiable until now. A pause. If you're willing, we'd like to discuss funding a research initiative. Small scale, fully independent. What you found deserves protection and real science. Marin's voice caught. You're serious as cancer, Gina replied softly. We believe it matters. You matter. Marin set the phone gently back in its cradle. The dial tone lingered too long before cutting away. Tears didn't come. Not yet. Her body refused them. Back in the prep room, the volume had been lowered. A tray of pastries sat untouched. She hungered for nothing but air. The door burst open. Tess stood flushed from running, cardigan button, crooked backpack slipping from her shoulder. She flung her arms around Marin's waist. You did it, she murmured into the coat. Everyone saw. Marin blinked. Saw what? The video. The anchor said you were right. My teacher said your voice sounded strong. Tess looked up, eyes shining with something fragile yet fierce. And I told them I'm proud you're my mom. That undid her. Marin's knees bent not in collapse, but in surrender. She crouched, pulling Tess' close chin, resting on hair that still smelled of lemons and damp linen. Beyond the studio doors, a breeze carried hints of cypress and gasoline. Driving home with windows cracked, Marin let one hand trail the air, while Tess sat silent beside her. Neither spoke. Silence had taken on reverence. At the cabin porch, she paused, watching the marsh shimmer between branches. A dragonfly hovered, darted into a shaft of light, then vanished. Her phone buzzed. Inez Federal Review Board has opened a full investigation. Devco's legal team is rattled. They'll have to testify. She read it twice, then tucked the phone away. No victory dance, no fireworks, just Tess's boots thumping across the floorboards and the old wood groaning beneath their steps. Moraine followed the path toward the shed. The air hung heavy, summer thickening. Frogs croaked in the distance, warnings woven into night. She passed the tree where they had found the cassette, then stopped. This time she didn't sidestep the past. She let it settle in her bones, failure, loss, grit, hope, each holding its place. Mom, Tess called. Can I take the sketchbook to the dock? Go ahead, Marin answered, without turning. The marsh looked changed, still murky, still uncertain but no longer threatening. It carried something unnamed. She brushed a hand along the porch rail like greeting an old friend. The wood felt steady. That night she slept more soundly than she had in weeks, though dawn brought its own weight. By morning she was already on the road, Tess beside her, envelope in hand. The courtroom buzzed with expectation. Fluorescent lights hummed above polished benches. Marin sat near the front, Tess's hand warm on her knee. When order was called, the murmur stilled. She rose at the sound of her name. The envelope crackled as she stepped forward. Across from her, Devco's latest attorney tilted his head as though the verdict were already decided. The judge adjusted her glasses. Ms. Corley, we're told you've received an offer. Yes, Marin said steadily. $2.5 million for the rights to the property known as Wells 3B and all associated materials. Gasps rippled through the rows, even the stenographer glancing up. And your response? She drew a breath. Her palms were steady. Eyes lifted to the tall windows, to the clouds beyond the courthouse roof, then returned to the bench. I decline. A whisper slithered through the chamber like wind under a door. This is not about money. It never was. From the corner, Clegg shifted. His posture held sharpness, but unease flickered in his eyes. He stood. Your Honor, this is a stunt. Dramatic, yes, but meaningless. The offer was generous. A woman with limited means should be questioned for rejecting it. The judge raised a brow, but before she could reply, another voice rang from the back. We'd like to submit new evidence to the court. Two lawyers advanced badges gleaming on their lapels, environmental litigators Marin had never seen. Documents recovered from Devco's financial office in Baton Rouge. Wire transfers disguised as consulting fees, falsified land claims, forged EPA correspondence. We also carry sworn testimony from a former Devco analyst, now under federal protection. Clegg turned toward them, face flushed. This is Mr. Clegg, the judge cut in. You will sit down and remain silent unless addressed. The hush that followed felt deeper than before, like the room itself was holding its breath. Marin stayed where she was. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Tess gave her hand a small squeeze. When the judge returned from chambers, the verdict came quickly. The custody agreement would remain unchanged, full parental rights returned to Marin. Wells 3B would be designated a protected community research site with provisions for future scientific exploration under public oversight. As the gavel fell, the noise returned. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged to the front. Marin remained still for a moment, watching the frenzy unfold around her. Kylene stood against the back wall, arms crossed tightly. When their eyes met, Kylene gave a nod, subtle, quick, and heavy, with the weight of too many unsaid things. Marin nodded back. Tess tugged at her arm. Can we go now? Yes, baby, we're going. They emerged into the afternoon light. The sky had cleared, sun spilling across the courthouse steps. Marin exhaled slowly, the weight on her chest beginning to lift. At the foot of the stairs, a microphone was thrust toward her. She brushed it aside with care. A notepad came next, shoved close, and she bent away without speaking. A woman with a clipboard tried to stop her again. Ms. Corley, a few words. Tess spoke first. No, thank you. They kept walking. The truck waited at the curb, paint flecked with dried mud, windows down in the morning heat. Marin helped Tess climb in, then slid behind the wheel. In the side mirror, she caught one last glimpse of Clegg storming down the courthouse steps, two suited men hurrying behind. The radio crackled to life with a calm voice. Bayou Devco under investigation for environmental fraud. Court documents released this morning suggest. She switched it off. Trees blurred as they left town, cypress, ash, red maple. Gravel whispered beneath the tires as the road narrowed. At the cabin, frogs sang by the water's edge. The air smelled of wet earth and moss. The house lay quiet, papers still scattered across the kitchen table. Tess's drawings taped beside old notes. Nothing appeared different, and yet everything had shifted. Tess dropped her bag. Can we go see the doc? Marin nodded. Just don't fall in. They walked the path together as the sky bled orange and pink through the trees. At the dock's end, Marin paused. A distorted reflection rippled back at her from the dark water. She looked past it toward the silt and history stirring below the surface. Letting the thought rest, she turned for the house. Sleep that night was short and broken, yet by dawn her hands already ached for work. The shovel leaned against the porch rail, blades streaked with earth. Her fingers, caked with dried mud, flexed as she rubbed warmth into her arms. She had begun digging before sunrise, carving trenches behind the house. Water needed somewhere to go. Not everything could be fixed at once, but it had to begin. The floor groaned beneath her steps. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast and citrus soap. Tess sat in pajamas at the table, scissors, working scraps of colored paper scattered like confetti around her elbows. I'm making signs, she said without looking up, for when people come here to learn stuff. What kind of stuff? Marin rinsed her hands in the deep sink soil, spiraling away down the drain. Plants, wells, secrets. Tess grinned, but only the good kind. Marin reached for a towel. On the counter sat a cracked mason jar holding 3 green sprigs, soft-stemmed, maybe the first seedlings they had rescued from the flooded boxes. Tilting the jar, she watched condensation beat along the rim. She drifted toward the stairs. One riser had split last week. She had set the broken piece aside, unsure what to do with it. Now she picked it up, thumb tracing the raw edge. Not smooth, but solid pine beneath the splinters. On the porch, she sanded the wood with a scrap of paper saved in the junk drawer. The steady back and forth calmed her. When it felt ready, she pulled a marker from Tess's art box and wrote in thick, rounded letters, Thibodeau Wells, Community Learning Post. She drilled holes, threaded wire, and hung it on the post by the front steps. Behind her, wind moved through the trees. The red-leaf sapling, barely waist-high, shivered like something waking after a long sleep. It didn't look like much, yet it was rooted. From the kitchen came the sound of cabinets opening and closing, Tess calling, "Where's the good glue?" "Check the shelf above the coffee," Marin answered, lingering outside for a few breaths more. Her chest felt unexpectedly light. Not empty grief, never left cleanly, but balanced. Bills remained. Water still pooled beneath the house. The inbox still brimmed with deferred decisions. But she no longer felt like a runaway. The screen door creaked as she returned. Tess had taped 3 signs to the wall: sample room, mushroom spotting, and one that simply read, "Ask about Everett." "You're ambitious," Marin said, wiping her boots. Tess shrugged. "We have the space. They had space, air, dirt, time. Not all good, but all theirs." Later, Marin unpacked the last box from the closet. It held a faded photo of her as a teenager, bent over a microscope, her grandmother's garden journal, and a cloth pouch with 2 hand-carved pendants, symbols matching Everett's research. She hadn't known they were there. Someone must have hidden them for safekeeping. One pendant she placed on the table beside the jar of sprigs. The other slipped into her pocket, its grooves warm against her palm. Afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window, laying amber across the floor. Tess dragged a folding chair out to the gate and propped her handmade sign. Marin followed steady steps, carrying her to the edge of the lot where the soil they had turned for drainage gleamed under the sun. It would take weeks to settle, maybe longer. Yet already the air smelled different, less mildew, more clay and green. She crouched by the sapling, pressing a finger to its trunk. Moisture clung to bark, and beneath it pulsed something neither audible nor visible, but undeniably real. Tess knelt beside her. "Do you think it remembers the old tree?" Maybe, Marin murmured. "Or maybe it's only becoming what it was meant to be." The girl nodded as if that explained everything. As the sun dipped, shadows stretched across the clearing. No sirens, no news, no courtroom whispers. Just breath, wind, and boots that no longer sank in the mud. They cooked soup, carrot, and thyme, Tess stirring, while Marin sliced bread. Silence lingered, not heavy, but whole. Later, Tess curled in her room with a book on her knees, flashlight tucked under her chin. Marin watched from the hallway before switching off the light. In the kitchen, the wooden sign tapped once in the breeze through the open window, then stilled. Night deepened. Beyond the porch, the well line shimmered under moonlight. Beneath it, something ancient hummed a rhythm, not begging to be unearthed, only remembered. By morning, quiet had shifted. Trucks rolled up, voices carried, and the porch no longer belonged to silence. Footsteps and chatter filled the back porch. Folding chairs dotted the yard, occupied by grad students in rolled sleeves, reporters scribbling notes, lawyers balancing laptops. An extension cord snaked across the boards, powering a battered printer Marin had coaxed back with duct tape and prayer. It wheezed out another batch of orientation flyers. She handed them to a girl in a two-lane sweatshirt. "Make sure they reach the town hall booth," Marin said, glancing at the sun sinking behind the trees. "And remind Tess to keep folks off the red fern patch." The girl nodded, already hurrying down the trail. Marin let out a breath. The house itself had transformed. Posters lined the walls, Everett's research, annotated route diagrams, schedules with Tess's name scribbled into every margin. The kitchen table had become a planning station. Someone had left a whiteboard. Another abandoned a box of trail mix labeled "staff only" that nobody obeyed. Her inbox pinged. Signal lagged, but the message loaded from Dr. Inez Holloway. Subject: "It's official. Federal investigation open. Racketeering, bribery, falsified land records. Devco's lawyers scrambling. No fireworks, no headlines shouting justice. Just text and a blinking cursor." Marin smiled without meaning to. A second email followed. From Kylene. Attached a volunteer form sign. Message: "If there's room for someone who once stood on the wrong side, I'd like to start again." She read it twice. The air shifted, not colder, only clearer. Tess appeared in the doorway, hair tangled from running outside. "We're out of lemonade. I told them to bring water next time." "You negotiating now?" Marin teased, pulling two glasses from the shelf. Tess grinned, eyes bright. "Only for trade. One cypress drawing equals one cookie. They said that's fair." They drank on the porch, waving back to passers-by, letting the moment stretch. When the crowd thinned, Moran sat with a blank sheet. The map she sketched marked no wells or pipelines. Instead, it traced trails through shaded groves, a reading nook under sycamore raised beds for food plants, an open-air lab with waterproof boxes for notes. In the corner, she drew a compass rose, uneven handmade. Beside the legend, she wrote, "Continue what great-grandfather left unfinished." The door creaked. Tess leaned in with a blanket. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" "Sure." She crossed over, peered at the map. "What's this circle near the creek future greenhouse?" "Nice." Tess yawned. "Can I draw the sign I was hoping you would?" They walked back together, arms brushing. On the hallway wall, a newspaper clipping had been tacked by UDevco under federal scrutiny after community evidence emerges. In the photo, Marin stood blurred in the background. Tess was clear in front, grinning, both hands stuffed into her pockets. The room was quiet but alive with faint hums, machines charging papers, fluttering beneath a fan. Marin tucked Tess in and pulled the blanket up to her chin. As she turned to leave, Tess whispered, "Are we allowed to be happy now?" Marin paused. "Maybe we've always been allowed." The wind stirred and the red-leaf sapling cast a long shadow across the lawn, reaching as though it had somewhere to be. Marin returned to her desk, pen in hand. The map still waited corners blank and unmarked. She kept at it until lamplight thinned and night surrendered to a pale morning. Sunlight filtered through the red canopy, scattering speckled gold across the dirt clearing. A soft breeze tugged at loose strands of hair and rustled paper leaves taped to tree bark. The children sat cross-legged in a ring, their notebooks open, but mostly forgotten. In the middle, Tess stood barefoot on a flattened stump, her voice steady, hands animated. This seed, she said, holding up a smooth, dark kernel, was really quiet. It didn't sprout when the others did. It stayed still for a long time. Everyone thought maybe it was broken, but it wasn't. It was just listening. A murmur rippled through the circle. One boy shifted closer, nodding. Another traced his fingers along the soft line of moss at the tree's base. Tess continued, and when the time came, it grew sideways instead of up, because it had heard where the light was. Behind the group, Marin sat in a canvas chair, book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in minutes. Her gaze stayed on Tess, not hovering, just resting. The way someone might watch the tide roll in without realizing they're waiting for it. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Kylene approached carrying two mismatched mugs. She held one out wordlessly, waited until Marin took it. They didn't speak. Marin sipped. Too much sugar. Kylene shrugged. You always say that. Then drink the whole thing. They both looked back toward the tree. A gust swept through, lifting one of Tess's paper drawings into the air. A little girl chased after it, giggling. The class began to dissolve into smaller pockets. Some kids started sketching leaves. Others wandered toward the raised beds behind the old shed. One girl stayed behind, her pigtails uneven and socks covered in dirt. She raised a hand. Miss Marin, she asked, eyes wide. Can this tree cure anything? Marin didn't answer right away. She glanced up into the branches, red-tipped full, swaying with weight and stillness all at once. She leaned forward. Every tree can. If you know what it's trying to tell you. The girl furrowed her brow, not quite sure if that was magic or science. Then she grinned and ran off to find her notebook. From the porch, a faded sign swung gently in the breeze. The wood had been sanded, smooth letters carved clean by hand, Thibito Wells. Community Learning Station. It hadn't been there long, but it looked like it belonged, like it always had. Somewhere behind the house, a radio played low jazz from a dusty speaker. Volunteers passed buckets hand to hand, refilling water jugs, repotting saplings. A pair of law students sat under the clothesline, reviewing documents, pages fluttering like laundry. Kylene had wandered off again, probably to find more mugs or maybe just space. Marin didn't need to follow. There were fewer questions now between them, fewer apologies needed. They had both chosen to stay. Above, a bird circled once, then disappeared beyond the treetops. Its shadow slipped across the water, clear now, its surface no longer clouded with suspicion or silence, just light and motion and memory. Marin closed her book without marking the page. She'd remember where she was. Maybe not the words, but the weight of them, the curve of them in her hand. Tess darted by, cheeks flushed, holding a bundle of dried herbs tied with twine. For the welcome table, she called. Marin nodded, rising to stretch the ache from her back. As she passed, her palm brushed the bark of the red tree, rough, warm, no longer new but undeniably changed. She didn't need to give it words. The truth settled quietly inside her, steady as breath. Some things don't shatter, they shift. If you wait, if you stay still long enough, you can feel them rooting again. Beneath scars and fractures, life keeps pressing forward. In holding her ground, Marin hadn't only safeguarded her daughter, she had opened space for something new to take root, something lasting enough to outlive the shadows that tried to bury it.